Hello everyone. This is a project that I built about 5 years ago. And I actually made a video of some of the parts when I was making them. I was just figuring out how I wanted to do things and never uploaded it. I guess you could say there's a unfinished pilot episode unaired that I had made. But I figured since I had it out, I'd go ahead and show it. And of course, what it is, it's a meat grinder. And oddly enough, I found this meat grinder here at the antique car show in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Every year in October, I believe it's Columbus Day weekend, they have a car slash antique flea market, and it's all car related mostly. But you can find a little bit of anything there. And of course, I come across this meat grinder, and then kind of just left it there. And then like an hour later, I started having buyer's remorse in reverse, where you start kicking yourself for not buying something. So I went back and found the booth again and giving $20 and bought it. But what intrigued me the most about it is I'd never seen one with just a single foot. I wasn't even sure what was going on with this. I thought maybe it went into some sort of newer powered unit or something. I'd always seen the one that has the 4 feet and then they're bolted fast, or the smaller ones that have the like the question mark shaped thing that clamps to the table. But anyways, I bought this, I got it home, I started searching, and then I found a picture of what it actually is. And I would not be surprised if they haven't made this in 100 years, this particular outside version. Now, the inside, it's an Enterprise number 432 meat grinder, which is now owned by Choprite. So I can buy all the parts for it. All the internals are the same. It's just the external casing I don't believe they make no more, which if that goes bad, you might as well buy another meat grinder anyways. But the way it was intended was for a hand crank, but the hand crank did not connect directly to this. The hand crank had a ring gear and then a planetary gear, and the hand crank was into the planetary gear. And that was all casting and had a base and everything that this slid into. That is how the original was. And I'll insert a picture of it right here so you can kind of understand what I'm talking about. When I was younger, when I was a kid, basically, whenever we did meet up, I always wanted to throw it in here. Of course, they'd never let me. That was the old person's job. My job was I got to clean it up when we was done. Yippee. But the problem is the one we had was a little smaller. This is a 32. It was a 22, I think. It had the 4 legs and it was bolted fast to the table. Well, you could take the auger and everything out, and of course, somebody would wash that upstairs, my aunt actually. The base, I got to go get a bucket of water and dishwashing liquid and sit there and scrub all the lard out of it. And the whole time I was doing it, I was thinking, boy, if I could only get that up to the kitchen sink, if I could just grab it and pick it up and take it to the kitchen sink, it would be so easy to clean this dang thing. So I figured out how to make my lifelong dream come true. Turn it on here, and I can simply unclamp it and just take it out when I'm done. Take the whole unit upstairs, disassemble it, clean everything, put the hot water to it, let it dry, put it back together, bring it back down here, and it's actually easier to assemble when it's running. It self-aligns itself. Tighten this up and we're ready to go. But I'm going to pull it out because I'm running it dry. Don't like to do that. Alright, let me shut it off so it's not so noisy. This is actually a table saw switch off of some old dinky table saw that was made in the 70s. I purchased it at an auction and decided to scrap everything except for the switch. I kept it, and that's what's on here now. The meat grinder, if you've never seen a 32, I had never seen one. We always just had, I think it was a 22. Well, a 32, you can actually get your whole, 22, you lose fingers. A 32, you'll lose hands. So, pretty dangerous if you stick your fingers and hands in the wrong spot. But the way I made this thing is, first of all, you'll notice it's all plywood. And the reason being for that is because I did some concrete pouring back around that time, and I had all these 3/4 inch plywood concrete pouring boards that was no good anymore. So I cut rough sizes out of them, threw them behind the wood stove, let them sit there for a couple months, and then when I finally started on this, they was good and dry and ready to roll. I guess you kiln dried, stabilized. And when I cut them out of the warped forms, I had picked the flat pieces that was left, so they had already been, I guess, proven out, and then I dried them and they never moved, so they're pretty much stabilized. But once they was dried out, what I did is I glued them together, for at least for the top, and then this piece down here, these are just single layer. I glued them together, and then I polyurethane them 4 or 5 coats, and then I immediately come over here and bolted it down, and then carved out my recess for this piece and polyurethaned it 4 or 5 times. Put everything together and then polyurethaned it 4 or 5 more times. And you also notice that these holes where the carriage bolts are, they're filled in, and that's polyurethane. It's what I had. I mean, I could have used epoxy and did it way quicker, I guess, but I had polyurethane and I just used it up because I don't use a whole lot of it. And what I did is I got an eyedropper and just kept filling these up. And then I'd come down a half hour later, an hour later, and it would all be gone. I'd fill them up again and then repeat. And finally, eventually, it started staying in there, and then I filled them up. And it wasn't dripping out on the floor or anything. It was actually, it went somewhere into the wood. So the wood grain, the end grain, I guess, down in there sucked it right on up. So that should have really stabilized things too. And like I said, it was a long process doing it, but it really wasn't time consuming. I really did it as a break. I'd be doing other things, and then I'd take a break, and I'd just come down, grab a bar stool, and grab the eyedropper, and sit there and fill all these little holes up with polyurethane. And then I'd get back to work, and then an hour later or so, I'd repeat it. But this piece here is made with a 1/2 inch plate. This is a four pieces here, and then 1 inch plate, and then another piece of 1/2 inch plate. This has all the tapped holes in it pretty much. This has 4 3/8/16 bolts holding it, socket head cap screws, and so does this side. And what I did is I tapped this piece, drilled this piece, got everything where it needed to be, made sure everything was right, and then I tightened all the bolts down. And then I individually removed each one at a time, put red Loctite on it, put it back and torqued it to a spec that I had found online for 3/8/16 bolts. Forget what that was anymore. I just wanted to make sure they was as tight as they could be. And I also had set screws that I drilled here on the side. So once I got them in tight, I jammed all these set screws against the side of the threads on the bolt so they can never back out. So they ought to be pretty well permanent. I originally planned on welding this, but I decided bolts was probably less work in a lot of ways. You can see I have a notch here. What that is I just put this one in because this one was here. That's just so I could get the thickness of this down enough where this bolt could reach the whole way through and be able to protrude out and land in this notch to hold it in place. The homemade, I guess you could call it a pillow block. What I did with these is I just took 1¼ inch thick steel, cut them to size, and then put them on the mill, squared it all up, figured out where I needed to put the hole for the shaft here, punched that out, put it on the lathe on a 4-jaw chuck, finished boring it, and then put a 90 groove in it to accept a bearing with about 1¼ inch hole size in it. I'm going off of memory. It was around 1.25 inches. It was either 1.25 inches or it was metric close to 1.25 inches. I can't remember what it was. Of course, I got shields over everything. I added them just to make sure no kid would ever come up while he was working and sneak down underneath the table there and grab something they wasn't supposed to. There's nowhere they can really get their fingers into to hurt them. But after I made the ID grooves, I, of course, sawed them in half and then milled the saw cuts and put shims in here. That's actually a hard rubber. And snugged it up nice and tight so it wasn't loose, but it wasn't squeezing the bearings. You might have noticed that this has a flat spot on it. That's where the original mechanism hooked up to. I also have a flat spot in here. And how I did that is at an antique mall, I found a handle that was the right size to fit on this. So it's cast iron handle. So I cut all the handle stuff off and then put this part on the lathe and turned it down and bored this part out. This is 1045 steel. And then I press fit this into there. And then I put it back on the lathe after I pressed it in there. And I put a face 45-degree weld chamfer where the two different metals met. And then, of course, you can see the difference in color of the steel. Then I simply welded, focusing on the 1045 steel, because that's what my welding wire was for, and let it kind of overlap the cast iron. And what that does is, it might not really be bonded to the cast iron, but it acts as like a retaining ring, so it cannot ever slide back out. And then, if you see this discoloration right in here, I don't know if guys will be able to see it or not. But then I put two set screws in here at 90 degrees from each other. 1/4 set screws, counter drilled down into the cast iron, and then jammed the set screws in there, and then welded the hole shut on that. So now it's mechanically connected, so it can't ever slip, spin, pull out, twist, or whatever. I did have another option. If I couldn't find the handle, I was going to go with another option, which required a lot more machining and work. But I was thinking that another way I'd come up with was to take this and mill it halfway, or like down to where I needed the flat to be, and then simply weld a piece of metal on top, and that would have made this flat. Took and welded it the whole way around. Put it back in the machine and turned it down so it was all nice and neat again. I could have did that. The pulley that you see back here is what this whole thing is designed off of. I had looked online and what speed do you run a meat grinder at? And I seen people saying 250, and I seen people saying 75. So I just shot for 90. I figured we'll go for 90. And actually it runs 93 RPMs. So I hit it pretty good. But the biggest pulley I could find around, because I wanted to hurry up and get started on this back at that time, it was just kind of antsy to go, was 11.5-inch pulley. And I knew other pulleys I could buy, like a Tractor Supply and all. This come from an antique mall. And I figured it up and it would work, so I purchased that. I think I get $12 for that. And I bought that, and then of course I went to Tractor Supply. And I bought these two other pulleys. That's a 6-inch pulley, and then that down there is a 2-inch pulley. Bought the pillow blocks here off of Amazon. And this pulley over here had to be custom because I could not find a pulley at Tractor Supply that had a 5/8 hole in it. They only had 1/2-inch holes in them, or like 3/4 or something. Or at least a small pulley that size. You had to go up bigger pulley, and I wanted a small pulley. I could have turned the shaft down to 1/2-inch, I guess, but I just decided just to make a pulley for there, so that's what I did. This here, and I actually just updated this back in the spring. This used to be a piece of 1/2-inch plywood, but the way I got the springs on it, and the belt over here pulling upward, and this belt kind of pulling that way, it took that board and twisted it over time. So I replaced it with a piece of 1/2-inch plate steel. It could have been 1/4 inch, but I had 1/2 inch and it was almost the perfect size. So I kind of stuck it in there. I just only had to mill like a 1/2 inch off of it or something to get it down to size. So that is the gist of that. The motor over there is a 1/3 horsepower motor, 1725 RPMs. And of course, I got it reduced down to 90 RPM, 93. And of course, you know, it goes from small to big, from small to really big. The tables. If you can see how I made them so they would fold up. And this is all custom made stuff. I didn't buy none of that. I just used tube steel. And I made them so you could kind of see how the mechanism is there. Same thing over here. And I added these little rubber things on because you see when I flopped it down, they'll bang off of here and I didn't want to chip my paint job up. So I added them little rubber caps. This in here I got to use both hands for. It don't go up. Well, I got to do it a little different because it won't let it go up as high as the other one. It bottoms out. And of course, this is where you lay your ingoing meat, and that's low enough over here to lay your outgoing. And I actually modeled this off of bins you can buy online for meat, food. And so I got the measurements off of them, and I made sure that one of them would fit under. So I just thought you fellas would be interested to see this. If anybody thinking about making one, it might give them some ideas. Oh, I forgot one piece. The table itself, that is off a Craftsman radial arm saw. Bought that at a outdoor flea market. It was all taken apart, and I reassembled it and sanded it, repainted it, and everything else. And of course, here's one last feature I forgot, a little storage bin there. Technically, this thing is not done yet, because technically, I got to get me a little brass handle and put on here. I don't have to. I mean, it works just fine without it, but I would like to. But anyways, that's my meat grinder. Thanks for watching.